Welcome to the Tech Humanist Show, a multimedia format program exploring how data and technology shape the human experience. I'm your host, Kate O'Neill.
And at Netflix, that was everyone's job. Do what's best for the company. You're empowered. But most companies don't do that. And it's fear, right? It's fear that leads to lack of trust, right? But it's all fear because it's new and it's foreign.
That was Dr. Joel Mier, currently a professor at the University of Richmond and the former head of marketing and customer experience at Netflix, where we overlapped with one another earlier in our careers. In this episode, you'll get a chance to learn about Joel, his passion for marketing, and some of the insights from his time at Netflix, as well as how streaming platforms have evolved. Enjoy this conversation as I reconnect and catch up with Joel. Joel Mier, it is unbelievable to see you after all these years. And I want us to dig into the years that we spent together at Netflix, but you spent even more years there, and I want to talk about those. But
Sure.
I also want to hear when I get a chance to sit down with innovators like yourself, I always love to hear some origin stories, some superhero origin stories. So if you would if you would share a little bit about how it all began. People know you now as a strategic marketing expert, but what were the early years starting down that path, and what was your entry point into marketing? How did you know it was the thing you wanted to pursue?
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for reaching out and making this connection, decades later. And congrats to you and all that you've accomplished. It's really a treat to be here. So, yeah, origin story. Gosh. So here's the thing, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I really had no idea. If you were fortunate enough, you went to college. And if you went to college, if you had a drive, good for you. But when I think about my peer group who I went to college with in the, mid 80s, I have to tell you, I don't think a single one of us had any significant consideration of major, and whatever we did pick, we're not doing. So that to me was kind of a really—
What did you pick?
Political science.
Oh, right.
Right. So political science, and that'll kind of thread through a little bit more of maybe becoming the accidental capitalist that I've become, right? That I wasn't expected. Do you remember our friend James Rocky at Netflix?
Absolutely.
He always talked about wanting to write a book like Life of a .commie, right? So he was absolutely, this diehard communist who believed in redistribute all these amazing things that were great to talk about. So that's a little bit more than me, but this accidental capitalist is absolutely true. I didn't expect to be here, but I digress. I think the answer comes in what I found in my political science work. I was really working towards, so maybe I did find a little bit of a path, but I was working towards maybe a career in towards city and municipal planning. My thought was the use of land, the most important, valuable asset to humankind, being able to help do that at a local level is pretty important, right? Zoning policies and land use policies and things of that nature. And so as I was working towards that, I was doing quantitative data. I was analyzing, for example, voting patterns, right? And trying to make sense of voting patterns. And it's so funny, as you look back 30 some odd years later, you don't really realize those dots were there until you have the opportunity like this to reflect and stop. But what that really taught me, in a way, as a guy that wasn't good at math, analyzing data and math are related, but they have nothing to do with each other, right? There's a Venn diagram, there's an overlap, but they're not the same thing. And so what it really helped me understand, Kate, was the power of going beyond the total, the average. When you deconstruct things, you find these unbelievable truths. So the saying I've come up with is averages mask truths, and I want to blow up averages and dive in and dig deeper. And I didn't know I'd apply it to business for a few years, but that really was the kind of origin of, wow, for a guy that was afraid of math and numbers, SPSS on a mainframe in the mid 80s blew my mind. And when it became time to, become a grown up, and there was this girl I liked and I was thinking about a relationship, and she ended up being, my wife 34 years later, I realized I had to go get a job, right? Like a real job. And so the fiscal reality of, do you want to be a city planner and make, virtually nothing, or do you want to do a little bit better? And that's when I realized data ported into marketing, and that's how my career started back in 1991.
So then, and you have this this data savvy and a mind for insights and strategy, which clearly political science, even if you didn't think about what that was going to lead to for you, it must have been partly like the strategic mind of yours that's drawn to that. What brings you to Netflix and
Yeah,
when?
yeah. I told the story to a friend of mine the other day, and it's so funny. I had spent a few years in Silicon Valley, right, being a Bay Area native, and so I worked at Gartner, and then I went to Adobe and got to be on the initial team that was the strategy team. There was no strategy team, so I was at Adobe and doing all this really cool stuff with PDF and Photoshop and Illustrator and these amazing tools that enable the creative expression. It was just like unbelievable place to work. But this thing was happening out there in the valley, kind of called the internet, and it was beginning to take off. And I remember at the time driving through Los Gatos and Campbell and to my neighborhood in Willow Glen, and there was literally no office space, like zero office space. I think it was like less than 0.5%. And everyone was hanging a shingle on .com. All right, so there was that trend. At the same time, Adobe was largely wasn't a B2C. It was more B2B. And even if you're a graphic designer, that's your livelihood. That's a B2B kind of relationship, right? So it's more of a prosumer than a B2B. But I was watching this and I said, gosh, I really would love to take part in something that's online and something that's directly to consumer, because I've never experienced that, and I think now might be the time. And so I looked around at some options because everyone was hiring. It was an economy that was hotter than anything I've ever seen. And I ended up with a multitude of offers. Can I digress for a minute and tell you this little story?
Of course, yeah.
So interesting. So I accepted a position at Oracle, right? I was going to go to Oracle,
Okay.
which, by the way, is not consumer, right? And it's not really
Right.
online. So, screwed that up. But I accepted an offer at Oracle. And it was a really interesting role, and I thought it would be very, very intriguing and enjoyable. But the hiring manager, after 8 weeks, because I don't give notice until I have a letter in hand, right? I'm not going to get burned. So I'm waiting for a letter. I'm waiting for a letter. I'm waiting to give notice. 8 weeks went by and I didn't have a letter. And I said, you know what? If you are unable, hiring manager, to work through your HR processes and get me a letter in 8 weeks, you're not a leader I want to work for. So I called and I said, I'm not coming. I went to this interview at this startup that sounded really wonky and weird, DVDs and in the mail. And you got to remember, DVD players were $2,500. We didn't know anybody who owned one. And so, all right, I'll go talk to him. And so I went to Los Gatos and met with Mark Randolph, the co-founder and then president. And two things it was a great conversation. Great. Oh my God, I could ramble on this for hours. He had a white leather couch in his office. Only office in the building was Mark's, in the initial office. And he laid on this white leather couch with a volleyball, and he laid back, and he was talking to me as he was setting it to himself the whole time.
Oh my
I'm like,
God, that's so great.
What world am I in here, man? Where am I? I'm in the buttoned up, up Adobe 13th floor office, and now I'm, in La La Land. So Mark does that, and that was kind of like, all right, kind of funky. I can dig this. And then he says something that has stuck with me ever since. And he said, you know what, DVD, the technology is already dead. We just don't know it. And I thought, what the hell are you talking about? No one I know has it, but it's so important. And maybe we'll get to an article I wrote about it because it really identifies how that leadership team wasn't thinking only about the next day or the next new customer. It was thinking 5, 10, 20 years out. And that, I think, is one of the keys to the company's success. And the third thing, and the thing that really swayed me to go to this unbelievably disorganized, chaotic office, wires hanging frickin' everywhere, boxes, and it was just an absolute shit show, to be honest with you. And I'm thinking, do I leave the ivory tower of Adobe to come to the shit show? And he pulls up Tron. Do you remember Tron?
Yeah.
Tron was the name of the intranet back then. And
Yeah.
Tron had all the reports, the real-time reports, and he clicked and showed me dozens of real-time reports. Oh, look, here's who is on the site by state. Oh, look, here's what they've ordered. Oh, look, here's the average day. Oh, look. And he showed me all these unbelievable back to data, right? All these unbelievable slices of data. And what happened mentally to me was he was showing me thin slices, right? And what I realized is if I could take those thin slices and instead of looking at them by action, 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 look at them across as a customer, we could do amazing things here. And that's what convinced me, and I came to work for Mark.
That's a fantastic story. It's so it's such a great, colorful moment, but it also, I think it shows how they're already so innovative and thinking so progressively, but you saw right away the opportunity for you to add value there, it sounds like.
Well, I certainly hoped I could. And what I saw were the building blocks. I saw a leadership team that was open to doing things differently. I saw data that was clean, and that's so important, getting clean behavioral data that I'd never seen before. And those things really, I think, warmed me to this very risky at the time decision, right? To with a mortgage and a 9-month-old baby to go roll the dice on this nutty startup, right? Which most fail. And so the odds were at that time it was going to fail. There was no reason to think it would be any different than anything else. Now, of course, you don't subscribe to that and you don't think that, and everybody's the exception. Sadly, 90% aren't, right? But we were. But yeah, and the thing that I took there, I remember in the first few meetings with Mark and with Reed, who was chairman at the time. When I was leaving Adobe, Adobe, like most big companies, they really, again, wonderful environment, great leadership, unbelievable culture, but they really thought of whatever work in regards to the customer was really sacrosanct, and it was really kind of the privilege of the few. And I would look at these, the quick stupid story is you spend $40,000 with an agency to do this work. They deliver it to you in this beautifully bound report, and oh yeah, there's a CD in the back, yay us. And it sits on the product manager's shelf, and no one ever sees it. And I had to call bullshit on that, right? Like, let's democratize it. Let's make the humans human to everyone. And so I remember saying to Mark, I said, listen, I have this different model. I want to do something differently. I want to get everybody involved. I think data should be pervasive. Are you good with it? And he said, get the results. I don't care. I mean, not that I don't care, but his point was do what it takes to get the results. And that to me was the green light to do things very differently and not hire outside resources, because what that does is that doesn't build institutional knowledge. It builds report readers. And I didn't want report readers. I wanted people who lived and breathed the customer the same way I did. So that was really critical in those first few months.
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't think that even in my time there that I necessarily attributed to your influence that there was that element of culture, and I'm not gonna brook any resistance from you in claiming it, because you're you
So
sound like very much that this is coming from you. But what I remember very clearly about those years at Netflix is that the the culture of metrics pervaded
yes,
everything, but not in a way that was detached from humanity, very
no,
much the opposite. And it's been something that has stuck with me my entire career. It's a
yeah.
very formative moment. So you, Joel, have
Mm,
shaped a lot of the work that I have done, as I'm now realizing and putting those dots together, because it was so instrumental to me to be in a culture where we would go to the Los Gatos movie theater
yeah,
once a month
every
and
month.
do those metrics meetings
Yeah,
where every department is sharing their metrics, and
yeah,
there's this sense there's one goal that we're all working toward, one metric, and that's user growth, like new customers, or number of customers overall. And each department has its own part to play in that. We all have a
100%.
measurable
Yep.
metric that we contribute, we know at least somehow contributes directly or indirectly to the success of that unified metric. And it's something that I've shared with so many companies since then, that I've advised and consulted with, that's so hard to find. It's so rare to run across a culture that has truly democratized that
Mm,
sense of we're all responsible for creating this success together.
yeah.
So say more about that, because I know you did publish a paper
Mm,
some years later, 2021,
right,
right?
right, right.
About that culture of the sense of democratizing data, Netflix's culture of reinvention. There's
Right.
so much richness in this data, and we'll be sure to make that the link to that paper available in show notes for
Absolutely.
folks to
I'd
check
be
out.
honored. No, thank you. Yeah, it's great to be, listen, I'm beyond in terms I'm beyond proud of the role that my team and I got to play, right? And it was really the alignment and the confluence of events and people that allowed that to happen, right? The CFO, Barry McCarthy, came from Music Plus, a subscription music business, right? So he kind of got that. Tom Dillon, COO, right, running all the ops centers. That guy was a numbers geek beyond belief, right? Excel macro king. Leslie Kilgore, right, with P&G and Amazon. So it was the totality, right? And the fact that I so appreciate you kind of sharing our shared story with others, because if it might be more common now. It's not as common as it should be, but let's literally go back 25, 24 years and imagine 100 people who all know what the goal is. They all agree. They all know what their role is. They all know what they have to do this week. They all like that doesn't happen. Why isn't that table stakes? And so I sit here and still scratch my head at it. And in my client work like yours, I remember saying certain things along the lines, and people push back, and I'm sitting there going, "You're not getting it. I need to do a better job of getting you to get it." But in a 3-month engagement, you can't change an entire culture. But you mentioned the paper. What after transitioning into academia a decade or so ago, I wanted to step back, and you and I have both followed our former employer, right? We have a few, fewer and fewer friends there, but we watch with great pride its success and its innovation and unbelievable things. But I wanted to try to, as objectively as I can, which of course is impossible, but try to deconstruct what is it about the company that has allowed it for 26 years to continue to innovate, continue to be the leader. What is it about that place? And so with a colleague of mine at Georgia Tech, he and I interviewed a few of the leaders that were there at the time. And clearly, I've got my inside baseball stories that I can rely on. And basically, what I came up with, there were three major reasons, okay, three major themes. And what I love about these is that whether or not you're someone with an idea and you haven't done anything, or whether or not you're friends and family or Series ABC or a Fortune 100 company, what these things are true, right? And so the three things are, one is this idea of ambidexterity, which means that we're going to operate at all times with one foot in today and one foot in tomorrow, always. Every company operates in two time periods. The question is, what resources and time do you put where? I go back to Mark making that comment about DVD being dead. And I'm sitting there going, you're a fool. But of course he's not. I just wasn't there yet, right? And so that's a point of him living in the future that we know is coming. We just don't know when. And he's already thinking about it and planning for it. So that's one. And that has been there even to this day, right? That's number one. Number two is this idea of scalability, that they're always looking to scale and grow. As companies, as you well know, as companies mature, what happens is they build the systems and structure to slow themselves down, right? So let's imagine it's 1999 and or 2000, and we had to work on a content discussion or strategy. We'd pull up, we'd chat, and we'd make a decision, and we'd go do it. Right. Now, as a company grows and gets bigger, now it's 2005. Wait a minute. Let's get the team together. Let's get the managers together. You know what? This is an expenditure over a certain amount. We got to go to the CFO. And all of a sudden, what was a quick coffee conversation amongst trusted colleagues is now a month-long, drawn-out bureaucratic bullshit process. Right? And Netflix didn't do that. They're about scaling. Get the right people in the right roles, eliminate bureaucracy, empower them, trust them, and watch what happens. And you and I know what the results are. And then the third thing, which of the three, this is really core to my work in all aspects of my life, is this idea of customer centricity. It's the recognition that any success has to come through the customer. Peter Drucker, 1954, very famously said, and it's on the beginning of every slide I ever give, whether it's a class or a talk, a keynote like you give, it's the purpose of any company is the exact same. Two things: get a customer, keep a customer. You can't name a company that hasn't done that, right? And so it's the customer, stupid, and the company did that. They invested in uncovering and listening and learning and bringing into the building and going out to the different cities around the country to learn and listen in context, in situ, at their homes, right? And watching what they did and learning and then bringing that back and democratizing it, not putting it on my damn shelf. You know what I mean? So those are the three pillars that, and there's a lot behind each one of those, but ambidexterity, scaling up, and customer centricity, I think, are the keys that has made, that are embedded in that culture that has pervaded and persists for over 2 decades. And it's so cool.
It's very cool. And you model that so perfectly with these three pillars. But as you say, there's a lot to unpack within each one, like ambidexterity, this notion of being in two time frames simultaneously, incidentally, is very much what my next book is about.
Fantastic.
And so I'm very curious to unpack this a little bit with you, because the premise, in short, of the book is about making those kinds of decisions that move you into the future with an awareness of the fact that you have to make decisions that are based in the reality of now, but with that vision of the future. And how you do that is so much about some of the externalities, some of those realities, that whatever you can bring into those discussions. But I'd love to unpack some of that with you. Because especially as it relates to decision making. And it's interesting to me that in your article, there's a quote that I can't believe you actually wrote this. It's like, could you write my book for me? Like, you wrote, if you can't make decisions, are you really a professional? And, decision-making actors and processes change as companies expand and move through development phases. Meaningful decisions often evolve to the domain of the executive. consensual amongst relevant bodies and become overly complex. At Netflix, decision-making authority is broad in the hands of the employee. Approval and authorization processes have been eliminated, and the employee is entrusted with doing what is best for the firm. So this segues from that ambidexterity into the second point that you're talking about, which is that, the culture pieces and the trust and the empowerment. So talk to me a little bit about, unpack that for me a little bit about how those two concepts do work together, and can any company do this the same way?
Yeah. Gosh, I don't think any company can do this. The hardest thing that I have ever experienced in my career is trying to adjust an existing culture. It's even Patty McCord, our chief people officer, together at the time, even she has kind of shared with her vast experiences, changing culture is damn near impossible. So one of the most interesting things to me in reflecting upon this work and our time together there is an existing culture is brutal to change. This works when you build it from the ground up, right? And you inculcate it in the actions and behaviors and expectations of everyone in the hiring process. And if you think about a large company, so when I left Netflix, what brought me to the East Coast was a role with a Fortune 200 financial services company, 27 countries globally, and they wanted to become more, for lack of a better term, more customer centric. And so they brought me over to help the company in 12 product lines in 27 countries, be more in tune with the customer, help run our business, build product, service product, market product, sell product with a more customer centric lens. And I'm thinking to myself, global company, this is what I love. I have this Netflix feather in my cap. Let's go do that. And I had the most painful experience of my life. And a little bit of it is size, right? A few thousand employees, global. So that was really hard. But the hardest part, quite frankly, was you can't scale changing norms. It's literally hand-to-hand combat, one person at a time, and I couldn't do that with 7,000 people, right? And I couldn't get buy-in because the firm's history wasn't to scale up, it was to get to maturity, and then it went into protection mode. I have my fiefdom. I have my fiefdom. We don't have a shared purpose. We don't have a shared goal. I have my KPIs and screw you and yours because I want to get my bonus. The standard big company bullshit that happens. And I banged my head against the wall for 2 years thinking my Netflix mentality would work here, and it didn't. And so I had to learn instead to pivot and go, all right, I've got to learn how to change in a big business. And that's a very different set of skills. So I don't think it's possible to transition to the culture that you and I shared. I think you can make gains, and I think you can do some really smart, important things, but it's a Herculean effort that I just don't think I've ever seen it done at a company that's over a certain size or over a certain number of years old. I have hope, but I've never seen it.
Right. You did say one interesting thing in that run up that you kind of glossed over, which was no shared sense of purpose. And I wonder if that isn't kind of key in what's happening in an organization like that, right?
You're absolutely right. And I go back to our Friday metrics meetings out under the oak tree, right? And before the monthly meeting at the movie theater in Los Gatos, and talk about transparency. We knew all the numbers, we knew all the finances, and the rule was we're going to be open until we have reason not to. And in fact, it was only like 2 or 3 years ago in LA when somebody divulged the cost of the Dave Chappelle special that cost $25 million. That was, Kate, the first public leak of any internal piece of data. Isn't that astounding?
That is astounding.
Right. But you're right. You're absolutely right. And organizations, sadly, I'm glad I appreciate you chuckling as you read it, because when I wrote that section header, if you can't make decisions, are you really a professional? I mean it. I absolutely mean it. Imagine, think about all the people out there who have responsibilities and budgets and P&L and development goals, and they have to go check with their bosses, right? Like, isn't that your job? And at Netflix, that was everyone's job. Do what's best for the company. You're empowered. But most companies don't do that, and it's fear, right? It's fear that leads to lack of trust, right? But it's all fear because it's new and it's foreign. But yeah, it should be the norm.
Yeah. You also are you talking in this ambidexterity and
Yeah,
the sort of future casting
yeah.
around the reinvention. And reinvention is kind of a favorite theme of mine on a personal level as well as a professional level. I really appreciate people who have been through, sort of their career reinventions or
Hmm.
reinventions in their lives. But I also really appreciate companies that have figured out how to be relevant in a new way or building on something that they were already doing. And I think to an outside observer, it appears as if there's one major pivot in Netflix's history.
Yeah.
And your paper very clearly shows that that is not the case. Can you walk us through a little bit about that and how that
Yeah.
looks historically?
Yeah, that's really funny. I love this. I love this theme. So thank you for bringing it up. That to the outside observer, Netflix went from DVD to streaming, and now they're going DVD to streaming, and they might be doing some live events, right? Let's go watch Mike Tyson box again, right? So those of course happen, but it's the other things behind, not even behind the scenes, but the smaller ones that help organizations understand those are the right big decisions. So when Netflix started, most people don't know this. When Netflix started, it was just like Blockbuster, flat fee, one fee, certain amount of time, and if you were late, guess what? There was a late fee, right? So they tried that, didn't work. So then, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Let's try this subscription thing. But the subscription thing wasn't unlimited. It was four at a time for $16. And as soon as you returned one, we sent you the next one and charged you another four, right? It was a bait and switch. People hated it, but they liked elements of it. So we learned from there. And then before you know it, September of 1999, we tried this reasonable unlimited subscription thing, and it kind of caught wind. And by February, we had the data, and we said we're going all in. And by February of 2020, of 2000, gosh, um,
No.
that was the business model, right? And then they sold DVDs, right? John managed that process. And so I just outlined five different aspects, and we haven't even gotten to streaming yet, right? And so there are at least a dozen different small or big pivots that allowed the company to get to where it's at. And even now, it's still continuing to do subtle pivots with live events, with games. The smartest, back to the strategy, the thing that I love about what the company has done is that it has said we are going to prioritize and invest in local stories, local actors, local directors, right? And so we're not exporting Baywatch reruns, right, to Brazil. We're actually or in any country, right? And so these amazing pieces of content are being made locally, and these local stories, you and I now on the global platform get to see. And that didn't exist. And here's the thing that I find so surprising. No one's following suit. In this streaming war, I don't see others investing the way that Netflix is invested in local stories, local actors, local directors, local content. And that to me is a huge strategic advantage. They could, but they're not. And I'm perplexed by that, because you and I could rattle off amazing content, Squid Game, right? Or there's a French show that I can never get the name right, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. But there's this amazing content that is made locally that we through normal channels as of 10, 15 years ago, we never had a chance to see.
Is it Call My Agent?
It's
Or it's a
not.
different one?
It's the
Okay.
gentleman. It's the gentleman who's like the expert thief. Uh,
Oh,
he's
oh,
an
okay.
expert thief, and I can't think of his name, and someone might know it.
I
But
can't think of
but
it either.
yeah,
But that's a fantastic synopsis, and I think there's so many very interesting nuggets within that. And you said you're right. You covered sort of six or so even before you got to
right,
streaming.
right.
But what's interesting to me too is there are innovations lurking underneath of some of those pivots too that are very interesting to me. And this might segue us a little bit into the work you've been doing since, and
Ah,
the academic work that you've done helping students in learning marketing and strategy. Because to me, I think about something like Amazon Prime as having been one of the most brilliant products that's ever been created. And it's not a traditional product. It's a shipping package, right? It's an opportunity to buy into the opportunity not to have to pay shipping. And yet it's such a brilliant loyalty play.
yep.
And what I think about the queue,
Mm-hmm.
as being
Mm-hmm.
a similar kind of thing, it's never been something that Netflix put out front and center of the subscription offering. And yet dallying with, sort of experimenting with the subscription model was what brought about the queue. And the queue was a fairly new, I think, pretty new experience at the time to be able to kind of centralize your movie appreciation, the experience of being a movie consumer, and say, these are the things I would really like to watch. And I get to move them around and prioritize them. And now I have loyalty because I don't want to lose my queue. I'm not going to cancel my account. I don't want to
Right.
lose all that history and the ratings and all that. To me, that was, some of that just kind of comes with the territory of a new platform and being, the channel itself of the internet, the web being new and e-commerce being new. But there is a kind of an accidental genius happening there. And talk to me a little bit about that. Have you seen this in other companies that you've advised or worked with? Or, how do you think about that process of, you know, stumbling upon some kind of genius and not being smart enough not to dust yourself off and hurry away from it, right?
Yeah, it's a great example, right? It was such, and I think you've identified why the contextual environment or why it worked. Because what we need to remember as we're listening to this and talking about this now, there was no social media. There were no smartphones. We didn't have notes with lists of everything. That didn't exist, right? And let alone we didn't have access to the largest library of movies, which is to many of us part of our identity and is certainly part of the cultural currency, right? And so this confluence of events happened where I can keep it very easily and invisibly and show it off. And so I do think that one of the things the company did well is give breathing room, right, for ideas to germinate, take hold, or not take hold. And many, as you point out, many of the best things that emerge were accidents, right? Happy accidents. I wish I could. I wish I could list a litany of things that kind of follow the model that you've identified with the queue, and I'm struggling a little bit. But what I will
Because it
say,
is so rare, right?
because it
To
is
come
rare,
across
but
something that intrinsic, that's
but what I will
innovative.
say is there, and we talked about this a little bit about kind of the data in aggregate, yet the human individual story, right? You have to have both. And so I'll bring that theme back in this example. And again, most people aren't really going to know this, but do you remember Netflix Friends?
No, remind me.
Netflix Friends was a social media component before there was social media. So we had a tab. We had a tab back when the website had tabs, and it was called Friends. And it was a way where you could connect with people you knew were on the platform and show what's in your queue, what you watch, what you rate, make
Do
recommendations. It was a
remember.
social platform, and it was years ahead of its time. But that's not why I bring it up. I bring it up because what we put in place Reed, in his brilliance, was he said to the product manager, "You have 1 year and you've got to get to 20% adoption. Go. You have all the resources you want. And after 1 year, if you're not at 20%, we cut it." Right? And not 19.9, because 19.9 is not 20. And so it's the discipline, right? It's the story, the individual story in the context of the data. And so you can't let things go on forever, but it gives, back to your cue, it gives time for good ideas to surface or not, as they may or may not do. And so I've always respected and appreciated that kind of gas brake approach all at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that you bring it back around to this data mindedness and data analytics, and I think it's such a great way to reground the discussion, because I think it really is a nice reminder that there's so much insight potential, in meaningful insight potential in data, if we look at it with that sense that you're looking at human stories, right? That you're looking at. Yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, if I can interject, I love this. I'm so glad you brought it up, because I am so happy that and this is a little bit dated, but big data isn't new anymore. Big data is day to day. And so with kind of AI and all these amazing tools that are coming out, data in terms of zeros and ones is clearly more accessible. And what breaks my heart is that when we say data, that's what we think. That's only what we think. The biggest breakthroughs, some of the biggest breakthroughs happen not with zeros and ones, but in watching you. You're giving me data now by maintaining eye contact and nodding. You're telling me you're paying attention. You smile. It shows me you're happy. You're giving me data. This human data is the part that we're not teaching people to pay attention to. And that's the part that really, really breaks my heart. When we were exploring, again, sorry to keep going back 20 years ago, but when we were exploring ads on the website for the first time, because they tried selling ads on Netflix, I remember we brought in users and we had engineered their specific profiles to have ads on them. And so we'd bring them in, user testing one by one, and have them log in. And at the top was a banner ad for whatever, right? Paramount or MGM. And inevitably, they never noticed it. And my job isn't to point it out and say, "What do you think?" My job is to say, "Hey, just do what you're going to do, and speak aloud as you're going through and why you're doing that." And I'm waiting for them to notice it. And one guy, right? I'm a third person, so it's one person at a time. And after about 20 minutes, I say, "Hey, do you mind if I point something out? Would you scroll to the top? Look at the top. What do you notice?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, there's an ad there." And I said, Did you notice that?" He goes, "No. You see at the top, that's public space. I don't pay attention to public space." I packed up. We were done. I didn't need to quantify it. I didn't need to go survey that. I needed one person to say a truth that, you looking at me nodding, you get it. I got it. You with me? So when we say data, it's not just the zeros and ones. It's this empathy, this understanding that we have to share to get those kind of experiences and perspectives that once verbalized, are true.
Yeah, this is such a profundity about true insight, about the kind of thing that just, like, it probably made your hair stand on end a little bit when the guy said it that way, right?
Yeah.
It in your bones. I'm also thinking about how you still have to be able to translate. I have this background in languages and linguistics, and for me, also the work I've done around I ran one of the first analytics and strategy agencies, firms, and sort of translating this humanistic instinct toward empathy and connection and everything you're describing, with how do we even begin to talk about, maybe not quantifying it exactly, but having some kind of model that replicates or stands in for it or whatever. How do you think about that conversation with if you're consulting with a leader and they go like, "That's fine, we want to have meaningful connections with our customers, We want to be able to have, the empathetic, connected relationship. But how are we going to look for that? How are we going to know we're getting there? What's the metric we can follow? How do we, kind of get close in the data to an approximation that tells us that this is an empathetic understanding of the customer, something that's meaningful? What do you say
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I wish I had a client that articulated it that way. None of them do, right? It doesn't happen, as you know. They're dealing with growth rates, and they're dealing with adoption, and they're dealing with retention, and they're dealing with kind of the business metrics that you and I, know and love. What I start with, if I boil it down very simply into quant versus qual, right? Numbers versus emotions, they're both important. They're both important. But what I have found is if I get you to believe the data, you're less likely to believe the emotion. If I get you to believe the emotion, I can also get you to believe the data. So I typically start with immersion, which is we're going to go talk, we're going to go visit people in their contexts, and you're just going to listen. And so I try to instill and drive home the importance. And then after that, we'll point out, what did you hear? Here's what I heard. And I try to, connect and highlight things that were unique to me that maybe someone who isn't as experienced would pick up. And that doors open, minds expand, and that leads to the next, to the next, to the next, which eventually now includes quant and qual. I don't typically get it the other way. So I will lead with emotion, because that story of the gentleman with the public space, everyone will universally nod and get it. There's no survey that would have gotten that. There's no behavioral analysis that would have gotten that. There's no big data that would have gotten that. Not possible.
Yeah, not in so many words, not in a meaningful way that resonates in that truthful, insightful, impactful way.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What makes data analytics a catalyst for change? Is it when you can dimensionalize it across that emotion and sort of intellectual split? Do you think?
I think, yeah, I'll tell you, I think there's probably two phases, and I haven't really thought about it in the framework you've listed. So please allow me to be wrong, right? And maybe add to it in the coming months when we're in New York together. But what I would say is the first connection is tying to what's important to the person across the table. If their struggle, if their challenge is retention, I need to show them how something relates to retention. And now I have their attention. Attention. That was cute. And then that gives me a platform to now layer in more complexities, because I've demonstrated value and they're paying attention to the results. So I think it's kind of a layered approach. And to me, I have a friend who has an unbelievable startup. Unbelievable. It is so powerful. As a human, you and I should talk offline. You would so dig this. And he's having so many challenges getting firms to adopt it, because they're like, oh my God, that's phenomenal. I'd love that. But how does it help my employee retention? How does it help my sales? He hasn't quantified it yet, so they're not listening, right? He's got to give them that nugget. Now, should it be that way? We can debate that. But the reality is, for him to be adopted and have his platform adopted, he needs to demonstrate value in the context of what they care about. And if you can't demonstrate that, it's very hard to go to the next step.
Yes, that makes complete sense. And by the way, I realize we're running long. I want to be respectful. Do you have a hard stop at a certain point at 2:30 or?
I do at 2:30, but
Okay.
I think we can make hay in the next few minutes.
Absolutely. I want to make sure to get
Thank
a
you
couple
for
of
checking. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure to get a couple of points here, because I want to transition to just really quickly get in here into this discussion about, you've been teaching. When did that start? How did you get into teaching?
When I moved here to Richmond, Virginia, roughly 20 years ago, I see teaching as a way to kind of give back, I think. And there's a little bit of hubris in there, and I apologize and I acknowledge that, right? But I realized that there were some things that we've gone through and I've experienced, and I really enjoy the energy of college and universities. And so I decided to reach out and started to guest lecture in a few classes. And before you know it, a dean kind of said, "Do you want to be an adjunct and take a full class?" And then I did that. And then the light bulb went on, and like, holy crap, I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to do this. So then I had to figure out how do you prepare for a career in your late 40s to become a prof? And the answer was go get your doctorate and quit and go get a job. And thank God all that lined up. So it has been the absolute most rewarding, and it doesn't pain me to say this. I say this with pride. It trumps anything we did together. It trumps Netflix. That was so great. My teaching trumps that any day of the week.
That's fantastic. What do you find that students most need to get from you that you are most equipped to give them? Do you know what I'm asking? Like, there are plenty of other business instructors, marketing instructors, strategy instructors. What do you feel like you're bringing to the mix that you are most equipped to bring?
I think there's two. It's a very self-serving answer, isn't it? Right?
Well, you already went for hubris. Let's go for it.
All right. Let's lean in, shall we? I think one of them. So I think, and this is a larger comment. We don't need to get into it too deep, but I think institutions benefit from having a mix of very traditional academics with practitioners, right? And even though I might have the letters after my name, I'm in my core a practitioner, right? I do this, and so. I think that perspective, in a balanced perspective within a department, be it finance, marketing, biology, chemistry, it doesn't matter. I think that balance is really healthy. So I think there's a uniqueness because we're a minority within the academy. And the second one, though, which I do think is something that I'm very proud of, is I think that I can encourage students to take bold risks that are safe and do it early so that they learn that they're going to live, they learn that they've grown, and that sets them up for the next one. And that to me is something I'm beyond proud of.
I love that answer because it also ties into what the work I'm doing with this book. I mean, thinking about the future and taking those very meaningful next steps. That makes so much sense. I'm also curious, though, I would imagine you hear from students, more and more about sort of existential concerns, thinking about AI and the great amount of change at a large scale that they're seeing in the world.
Yeah.
What do you speak to them about? What do those worries sound like to you? And then how do you talk them through those concerns about the future?
Certainly. Well, I think there are two major concerns that I hear regularly from students in the 19 to 22, right? One is environmental and kind of the sustainability of our planet. And second is this concern around AI and things of that nature that you alluded to. On the first one, what I tell them is get involved, vote. If you don't vote, it's really hard to have a voice, right? You have to be engaged. You have to vote. You have to be respectful. You have to share your views. And you have to be consistent and passionate, and many of them are, which is wonderful. The other one on the AI front, what I say to them, which quite frankly, Ted Sarandos, CEO of Netflix now, to tie it back to that, right? He had a quote a week or so ago, which I sent to him and said, "Dude, we're totally aligned. 25 years later, we're totally aligned." And what he says is, and it's a little bit oversimplistic, not that Ted, you're oversimplistic, but I am too, that AI isn't going to take your job for those that learn how to use the tool. For those that don't learn how to use the tool, you're at risk, right? And so to me, and I realize it's such a broad oversimplification, but I view it as yet another tool that might be profoundly powerful in a way we haven't experienced, much like the Industrial Revolution or the kind of the internet. But we need to learn how to use it. And, the marketer that doesn't know how to use it to generate creative ideas or create headlines or subject lines in email, they're going to get trumped by the young marketing person that does know how to do that and is comfortable and is not afraid. So that boldness, I think, comes into play here, which is new technology, new unknown. Lean in.
Yeah.
And so that's what I say to them. And I've integrated it into my classroom so that they can use it at certain times, so that they can kind of go, oh, wow, this isn't so scary. That's really cool. That's really powerful. And then they continue on their own in other courses, which makes me really proud.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure to end here with some time for you to jump off. I thank you so much, Joel, for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, what a great conversation. It's such a delight to reconnect with you after all these years. Thank you for listening to the Tech Humanist Show. This episode was produced and edited by Thrive Loud Productions, with research by Ashley Robinson and Aaron Daughtry of Interrobang. You can find more information about the show's guests and links to their projects at thetechhumanist.com, where you can also find more episodes, or you can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to all of our guests for lending their voices to help make the future a brighter place. I'm Kate O'Neill. You've been listening to the Tech Humanist Show from KO Insights.